Myanmar continues to deal with the fallout from the military coup that happened there this week. My guest now is Aye Min Thant, a journalist currently in Yangon, Myanmar, who witnessed the military takeover and described it as, quote, being transported back to the old, isolated country. Thant was also part of the team of Reuters journalists who won the 2019 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. So first off, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I don't even know if what you're doing right now may be putting you at risk. So I want to start off by asking, how are you doing? How are you holding up?
Thank you for having me on. So it's always very difficult when you're talking about risk in Myanmar because there is a healthy amount of paranoia that is necessary in order to survive here, especially if you're doing the sort of jobs like journalists, organizers that often get into trouble with the government, whoever is actually in power. So I'm all right. There are a number of chat groups that are happening on encrypted messaging groups where journalists are checking in with each other as well as trading information about safety. But I do know that myself, as well as a number of people in my network, are moving around to ensure that they are not quite as easily trackable. And I know a number of people are not sleeping in their homes every night, or if at all.
Yeah, that quote that we used about it feeling more like the old isolated Myanmar. I wonder, this is a population that has lived under military rule for far too many decades. People are practiced at this. Are people sort of reverting back to old habits, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, every coup is new, and the material circumstance under which we're living is new, right? When my parents' generation experienced their coup, they had already been under military dictatorship. They had never really experienced a life where they were so connected to the international community the way that this generation of young people now are, who have had, the internet and Facebook and now TikTok, and has been in conversation with the world and understands what it means to be part of the global community. But yes, there's a lot of generational knowledge that is being passed down that, we all had hoped would become a bit obsolete. But, people are buying extremely large sacks of rice. There's a lot of talks about currencies. Do you hold the Myanmar jet? Do you buy US dollars? Do you buy gold? How do you manage your risk and diversify your options, essentially?
So listen, over the past few years here in the U.S., we have been very, very focused on domestic politics. And I think a lot of people have not been paying attention to what's been going on in Myanmar. The understanding for a lot of people is Aung San Suu Kyi. They know her as the leader of the opposition, that she is well loved, that she, grew up outside of the country, but returned to push for democracy there. She was under house arrest for 15 years or so and emerged having worked out a very unique power-sharing relationship with the military, that there's an arm of the government that is part of the military, another arm of the government that is civilian, and it seemed to be working. It was celebrated. And even when the military came under scrutiny because of human rights violations against the Rohingya, she defended the military in front of the UN, in front of the world. What happened to the relationship that she had with the military that led to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about democracy coming to Myanmar, it's a little bit like talking about how the U.S. became a democracy, or the U.S. became a country and became a democracy after the War for Independence, right? There were a number of ethnic and racial and religious minorities who did not and arguably have not achieved full freedom, and this is for both countries. I think in relation to the relationship with the military, it's always been an uneasy one. And this is not something that permeates international politics as much, I think, or international reporting quite as much. But, when there is criticism and pushback against the NLD government and Aung San Suu Kyi in particular, a lot of what gets told to activists, to people who are pushing for more, faster, is that if we do more, the military will do a coup, something that is written into the current constitution. And so it's always been a balancing act. I would argue personally that human rights precede anything else, and that if you are in a leadership position, that you should be willing to take those risks. But it's a very difficult position that I'm not personally being forced to make decisions for.
Mm-hmm. Myanmar has had a long history at times of being under military rule, but things are a little different now. We have the internet, we have social media, and I know that the military has been cracking down on the use of Facebook Messenger to make it difficult to organize. But I'm wondering, when you speak to your friends and family, when you speak to people who had lived under the previous sort of military rule, are they seeing things a little different this time around?
Yeah. Every coup is different, and the people who are leading the resistance are different. So in 1988, for example, this was before the coup, but this was a revolution or an uprising where people were protesting the government. This was led by students first, especially university students. And so when the shooting began in the streets, students were a large portion of the population that were killed. And one of the first things the government did was to shut down universities, and they were shut down on and off for years. This time around, what we've been seeing is that civil servants are really taking the lead. These are people who served under the previous administration, under the NLD, but also, presumably, many of them served under the Thein Sein administration, which was essentially a military-affiliated party that was working with the military that was technically elected, but many people boycotted that election. And so what you're seeing now is a resistance movement that's coming from within the government as well as from without the government. And sabotage from within those institutions will have a very different effect than students marching in the streets.
That is fascinating. In terms of what we know so far, has the military said anything about what's going to happen with Aung San Suu Kyi or any of the other members of the military the civilian government that are under house arrest? What sort of everyday people are bracing for in the next few weeks or so?
I think people are bracing for instability. Regardless of what the military announces, people don't tend to believe them because oftentimes they are engaged in psychological operations, and we've had experiences where they've misled us in the past. In terms of what's going to happen with Aung San Suu Kyi, a lot of the people that I've been speaking to believe that she will be held will continue to be held. There might be a trial. She will be convicted if there is a trial and continue to be held. But this is sort of the path of the resistance movement having no impact. So it's really difficult to say what will happen as the resistance movement continues to grow and adapt and try different tactics.
All right, Aye Min Thant, thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.